Days away from the Mamdani apocalypse in New York City. Is it actually going to happen? Well, we will discuss with Joe Borelli, the former Republican leader of the New York City Council. New Jersey and Virginia also going to the polls this Tuesday. Plus, we check in on the status of the government shutdown fight, and the Tucker Fuentes fallout continues, not in a great way. All of that and more in today's episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Well, we've been covering the Zohran Mamdani rise. We've been covering it perhaps at some length, but it's a story that really just can't be escaped. I wrote my column earlier today on it. We're going to talk about it on Monday as well. How can you not talk about it? From my perspective, it is the story of the week, of the month, whatever you want to call it there. Because you're talking here about a fundamentally radical human being who is on the cusp of taking over the nation's most important city. By the way, I would very much prefer that not to be the case. I would very much prefer it not to be the case that New York City is the most important city in America. I happen to not be a big fan. I grew up in the suburbs. I had a great childhood, beautiful suburbs, whatever. But the city itself, filled with a bunch of predominantly radically left, secularists, nihilists, ultra-materialist people there, not my cup of tea. General attitude, not my cup of tea. General stress, pace of life, not my cup of tea, and on we go. So I very much would prefer that New York City not be the engine of American life that it is. But if you're just thinking about the financial industry and the economy and the number of Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered there in New York City and the broader New York area for that matter, when you think about the arts and the culture and the fashion, this, that, there, it just is. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news, but it just is. New York just kind of is the place. And because of that, New York City mayoral elections definitely tend to punch above their weight in terms of the potential national implications. When Rudy Giuliani became the mayor of New York City back in the 1990s, and he immediately commenced with his broken windows theory of policing, cracking down on smaller, pettier crimes as a way to ultimately getting towards larger crimes, very much turning around the decade and a half, 2 decades that had preceded him when New York became something of an urban cesspool. The Giuliani mayoral tenure became something of a national template that many other big cities followed. So the fear is that Mamdani could become something of a national, dare I even say international template as well. He's leading by double digits in virtually every poll, as we discussed on the show earlier this week. And there's very little path. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I mean, Poly Market right now, the online betting markets have him as something of a 95% chance, give or take, to win the election. The only ways that this ever happens, the only way it ever happens, is if you get one of Andrew Cuomo or Curtis Sliwa to drop out. Realistically speaking, that would probably have to be Curtis Sliwa because he's polling third, even though he actually won his partisan primary. Cuomo didn't, top as an independent. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. At this point, there is little to no indication. So it'll take something of a Hail Mary for Andrew Cuomo to go ahead and pull this off. The commentary on this election, especially as we get close to Election Day, is just increasingly farcical and absurd. There's a radio host in New York City by the name of Brian Lehrer, perhaps you've heard of him, perhaps you haven't, talking about how Zohran Mamdani versus Andrew Cuomo is a hope versus fear election. Here is Brian Lehrer speaking on MSNBC.
This is a hope versus fear election. I think this is one way to look at it. And that's not to dismiss fear as a bad thing, by the way. I think a lot of Democrats voted against Donald Trump in the last 3 presidential elections out of fear of what he would do to the United States, and they would say their fears are coming true. They weren't necessarily in love with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Hillary Clinton. So I'm not dismissing fear as illegitimate, but I think it's a hope versus fear election. Mamdani is saying what he would do, and whether he can deliver on those things or not is another question, but he's raising people's hopes on affordability, free universal child care, freeze the rent, free buses.
Okay, so hope versus fear is one way to phrase it. I would frame it a very different way. I would frame this as sanity versus insanity, which, by the way, is something of a leitmotif in our current political divides, isn't it? But Zohran Mamdani is definitively on team insanity. Someone who literally quotes the Karl Marx and Engels Communist Manifesto all throughout social media. You can do an advanced search on Twitter. He's quoting as recently as the past 2 or 3 years. Someone who has repeatedly struggled to distance himself from condemning Sharia law. He has refused many times to condemn Hamas. He kind of, sort of, maybe finally did so. He kind of, sort of, maybe said some bad things about calls to so-called globalize the Intifada. And his domestic policies for New York are totally radical. Talking about gargantuan minimum wages of $30, all sorts of free busing and free this and free that and free that. Free this, free that. I mean, this is literally just the money grows on trees and the money falls out of the sky mayoral run. It is the political stance that you don't necessarily need to do anything in life to actually earn something. Rather, it is all just given to you because money is free and there are no downsides when it comes to taxation, inflation, or something. It's basically modern monetary theory, the old left-wing approach to monetary policy, MMT for dumb Zoomers. That's basically what Zoran Mamdani is doing right now. And again, he's probably going to win. I genuinely dread it. If you are in New York City, certainly, and you're watching or listening to the show, you have to do everything you can to try to prevent this from happening. Make sure to rally up your neighbors there. Try to get them at this point. I hate to say it, but you probably got to vote for Andrew Cuomo. And none of us have forgotten what Andrew Cuomo did in the nursing homes back during COVID, back in 2020. The guy is a genuine horror story. I mean, Andrew Cuomo, once upon a time in 2014, around then when he was governor of New York State, said that if you are one of these right-to-life people, these pro-Second Amendment people, then you have no right to be a New Yorker. I mean, literally talking about folks like me and you. So, I mean, look, very few people disdain and abhor Andrew Cuomo more than me, but he genuinely is the lesser evil at this point there. We'll see if he prevails. I don't necessarily see it happening. Other elections happening this Tuesday as well. So right across the Hudson River over in the Garden State of New Jersey, a very, very close New Jersey gubernatorial election. Jack Ciattarelli lost by a very narrow margin, lost by just 3.2 points to the current governor, Governor Phil Murphy, back in 2021, is currently trailing in the polls, but trailing by an at times close-ish margin. It totally depends on the pollster. I've seen some polls as recently as Ciattarelli down 1, Ciattarelli down 2. Sometimes he's down by as many as 10. So it is looking something of a long shot there. But he has a fighting chance. He has a fighting chance. There was one outlier poll from Emerson College at the end of September showing a genuinely tied race between Jack Ciattarelli and his opponent, Mikey Sherrill. So could it happen? Could a Republican take over the governor's mansion in New Jersey for the first time since the Chris Christie era? It's possible. Again, he came so close a few years ago. The general trajectory in New Jersey, which is why I think the state is fascinating, it is trending in a more right-of-center direction. I'm not predicting that Ciattarelli is going to win this race. I don't necessarily think he will. But Kamala Harris only won in New Jersey last November in the presidential election, only won New Jersey by about 5 points, give or take. New Jersey was about as close a margin, like a statistically insignificant difference from Arizona, which Trump also carried by a very similar margin, right around 5 points. And Arizona was considered one of the nation's big 7 swing states. It was one of the anchors of the Sun Belt swing state strategy there. Well, it turns out that Kamala Harris actually only won New Jersey by a very, very similar margin to Donald Trump winning out in Arizona. More generally speaking, as my friend Ryan Gerdusky has pointed out in numerous Substack articles in recent years, New Jersey, based on voter registration, based on the current makeup of the state legislature in Trenton, the state capital, is trending in a Republican direction. And New Jersey is a fascinating state. I mean, there's a lot of things to say about New Jersey. You know, it stinks. I mean, it really does smell bad, by the way. I don't know how many of you have actually driven on the New Jersey Turnpike through New Jersey. There are a lot of trash fills there. That's one of its reputations. But it's a very suburban state. It is neither an urban state nor a rural state because these two massive population centers there in New Jersey are these suburban areas outside New York City and outside Philadelphia. This is interesting to me for two reasons. One is that if Ciattarelli pulls off the upset on Tuesday while simultaneously Zoran Mamdani wins in New York City, as we were just saying, he is all but guaranteed at this point, sadly, to do. If that happens, if that partisan dichotomy happens, then I think that'll be something of a rebuke from suburbanites to urban dwellers. Put another way, it will be an implicit rebuke of far-left Democratic Socialists of America DSA-style governance. It'll be a rebuke of that in the nation's suburbs, which itself is actually really interesting when it comes to the current political climate, because a lot of folks said that in the Trump era, that when Trump came down the escalator and all the post-2016 iteration of the GOP, all of that entails, with the Romney-Ryan platform being a thing that passed, a lot of folks were really worrying about how the GOP would perform in the suburbs, right? A lot of folks said that the Paul Ryan kind of nice guy, so to speak, style conservatism was what appealed to the suburban moms, and the Trumpist stuff didn't really work very well. Well, actually, maybe there will be an interesting counter data point. We will find out, certainly in the state of New Jersey. Virginia, the Commonwealth of Virginia, also going to have elections as well. There is an attorney general race that a lot of folks are paying attention to between Jason Miyares and Jay Jones. Jay Jones, he of the infamous, revealed text messages calling for the death of his political opponents, a truly, truly detestable and disgusting thing in today's day and age. He kind of sort of condemned it, and then you had other people that didn't really call for him to resign. Very weird. Frankly, I think that the Democratic Party of Virginia would have been better off just having him drop out of the race and to bring in someone at the last minute. What do I know? Frankly, I don't really care. That's their problem, not mine. But Jason Miyares, who is the very capable current Attorney General of Virginia, one of the better Republican attorneys general, actually, I would argue, in the country right now, is currently set for another term based on the overwhelming majority of the current publicly available polling, up by 8 points in the recent Roanoke College poll, among other compelling data points. The governor's race, not necessarily looking so hot for Republicans there. You have Winsome Sears, who is currently trailing by, depending on the poll, anywhere from a 5 to 12-point margin against Abigail Spanberger. Sears probably going to lose that race. I hate to say it, but Sears has not necessarily been the most inspiring candidate on the campaign trail. Very, very compelling candidate on paper, not necessarily the best candidate when you kind of get off the paper onto the stump there. Perhaps there are some lessons to be learned there for Republicans moving forward. I guess the final question for Virginians watching and listening to this, the final question would be, do you really want to pull a 180-degree turn away from Glenn Youngkin? I mean, Glenn Youngkin has been, by any objective economic metric especially, a pretty compelling governor on an education and economic metric there in the Old Dominion there. Do you really want to pull a 180-degree turn? Do you really want to send kind of this massive symbolic rebuke to the Trump administration there? It's for Virginians to decide. We shall see what they do. I'm not necessarily entirely sure, frankly, that they want to do that. Meanwhile, the federal government shutdown continues to go on. It just continues to go on. This is like the shutdown that will never end. We are now just a handful of days away from this becoming the longest shutdown in the history of the United States. Literally, we are just literally a handful of days away of surpassing the 2018-2019 shutdown flight, 35 days, a clean 5 weeks. That was the longest shutdown in U.S. history. Then we're just a handful of days away from surpassing that. SNAP payments, food stamp payments literally running out this weekend. The U.S. Armed Forces active duty service members are going to stop getting paid, God forbid, in the next 2 to 2.5, 3 weeks at the most. November 15th is the date that I heard. We'll see if that happens, but what an absolute black eye, a horrific moral stain, and a massive own goal. I mean, talk about the fact that Pete Hegseth, when he was nominated for defense secretary, I guess now war secretary we're calling it, when Hegseth was nominated for that, a big part of his platform, and frankly a big part of the reason that I so vocally support him, was because I think he had a unique ability and has, in fact, evinced and demonstrated a unique ability to boost military recruitment numbers. What in the world would that say? What message would that send to recruiting new young recruits to the military if you can't get the freaking paychecks out on time? Disgusting. Absolutely abominable. Just disgusting that Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries are playing with this kind of fire. Because of what? Because of expiring Obamacare subsidies? The numbers that I saw was that if the current Obamacare subsidies that they're shutting down the government for now 4.5 weeks over, if these subsidies are not continued, insurance premiums have the potential to spike by 17% in states that have their insurance markets not run by the feds under Obamacare, and 30%. So the insurance premiums will spike by almost double in Obamacare federal government states, aka blue states. Do you see what I'm saying? They're shutting down the government because the people that are going to be hit by being overly on the federal dole for healthcare subsidies are blue state voters. That's what they're shutting this down for. That and illegal alien healthcare. I mean, it's just astounding. This thing has to end. This shutdown has to end. Every day that goes on longer at this point, it is something of a red mark. It's something of an own goal by the Democrats, by Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. I don't pretend to know what their off-ramp is, what their exit strategy is, but they got to figure that out ASAP because every day that goes on is just a bigger and bigger black eye for them. So in just a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Joe Borelli, the former Republican city council mayor. We'll go deep on the Zohran Mamdani election, all the possible ramifications of that. But before we do so, one other topic that we have to address on today's show. So we had Seth Dillon of Babylon Bee on the show a couple days ago in the aftermath of Tucker Carlson platforming and, I would argue, sanitizing the nation's leading Holocaust denier, a truly, truly loathsome, despicable, abhorrent, racist, vitriolic, misogynist, just an awful, awful human being, Nick Fuentes. Tucker Carlson has a lot of fans. He has a very large platform. And among those fans in recent years has been the nation's largest and most prominent conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation. And the president of the Heritage Foundation, Kevin Roberts, a former guest on this show, by the way. Dr. Roberts came on the show probably just a few months after we launched it, way back in 2022. And he's welcome back on any time, by the way, including, but hardly limited to, discussing what I'm about to say. In what can only be described as a hostage-like video that Dr. Roberts released from his social media accounts yesterday, he rebutted the rumors that Heritage was going to cut ties with Tucker Carlson in the aftermath of Tucker's sanitization and chummy, friendly, puffball interview with the scum of the earth that is Nick Fuentes. On the contrary, Kevin said that Tucker is a close friend of Heritage and will always have a home at Heritage. He referred to the folks who have been openly, vocally criticizing Tucker for doing this, including yours truly, I would presume. He referred to that as a venomous coalition, as part of the globalist class, among other things. But last I checked, it was Tucker's recent guest, Nick Fuentes, who at one point, just a few years ago, if I'm not mistaken, said that Adolf Hitler was really effing cool. It was Nick Fuentes who said that he is a fan of Joseph Stalin, the single largest butcher in the history of the 20th century. Is the venomous coalition the folks who are cheering on Hitler and Stalin? Or is the venomous coalition the folks who are opposed to Hitler and Stalin? I would have liked to have thought that the Heritage Foundation, the nation's long-standing beacon of the American right, and recently rejuvenated by Kevin Roberts, who's been a friend for years, who's generally done, in many ways, a great job there at Heritage, especially after the failed presidential tenure of his predecessor, K. Cole James. I would have liked to have thought that the Heritage Foundation would make this kind of basic distinction. Does Tucker Carlson really have that kind of a spell? That the president of the Heritage Foundation is unable to call him out? That the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, is unable to call him out? At what point would it take? If Nick Fuentes and the sanitization of Nick Fuentes, if that is not the line, then I genuinely ask, what is the line? Is there literally no line? We say we just want to have a conversation, rebut their ideas. Okay. So now we're having an open and free exchange of ideas about whether the Holocaust happened. We're having an open and free exchange of ideas, as the case may be, about whether J.D. Vance's mixed-race children are horrific simply because they're mixed race, something that Nick Fuentes has said. A disgusting thing. Disgusting. And J.D., to his credit, about a year ago, called Fuentes a total loser. What does that say about the vice president's friend, Tucker Carlson, for bringing on that total loser in a friendly puffball interview? Folks, we're not going to shy away from this fight. Whenever this happens, we are going to call it out. Whenever this happens, we are going to call it out. But for now, I just have to say, this brings me no pleasure to say, I was appalled by Kevin Roberts' video. I was absolutely flabbergasted and appalled, something that I told Kevin myself. It was total moral and political cowardice, and it evinced a lack of leadership. And I hope that there is going to be something good that comes out of this, as difficult as it is to see at this present time. Well, there's really no one better to talk about the potential, likely, imminent arrival of Zoran Mamdani as the mayor of the nation's largest, most important city than Joe Borelli. Joe Borelli is the former Republican leader on the New York City Council. He is also currently the managing director at Chartwell Strategy Group. Also just an all-around good guy, a genuine kind of good old-fashioned New Yorker. So Joe Borelli, welcome to the Josh Hammer Show. Thanks for joining us.
I'll take it. That's a great intro. Thank you very much, Josh. Appreciate it.
Well, it's well deserved, my friend. So, Joe, you were the Republican leader. You were very visible in this role, I would say, across print media, across cable news there. Talk to us, first of all, before we kind of dive into some of the details, procedural and substantive. Is this actually a foregone conclusion? Is Zoran Mamdani definitely going to be? Is there any way that he is not, basically? I mean, kind of like handicap for us. If Cuomo drops out, Sliwa drops out, is this a total foregone conclusion, or is he definitely the next mayor?
It's not a foregone conclusion. There is a slight path for Andrew Cuomo. Some of the vote results we've seen, some of the demographics, predominantly boomers, predominantly Gen Xers, people that are more predisposed to vote for Andrew Cuomo, are actually coming out en masse. And we've also seen him have some penetration in the Asian community, in some of the black community. Obviously, Eric Adams is supporting him, trying to bring as much moderate black voters to the sort of the coalition of the desperate, I would call it at this point, of people who either like Andrew Cuomo or like me, who are just going to hold their nose and remember how much I can't stand Andrew Cuomo and just check the box for him, unfortunately, at this point. But there is a path. It also would help if Sliwa would exit the race, but knowing Curtis Sliwa, he will not do that. He's not that type of guy. In many ways, the sideshow around the election is sort of the main stage for him, and I think he likes the attention and he likes the influence he has. The sad thing for the Republican Party, because I'm a loyal Republican, is that Sliwa, by being in last place consistently for a long time and polling at half of what he was polling 4 years ago when he got blown out by Adams, actually put himself in a position where he could leverage those votes in the Cuomo administration, right? Not just we think that meaning like, could he get a job in the administration? No. Could he guarantee that Republicans get significant jobs? Not just him, but Republicans get significant jobs in the Cuomo administration. Could he make a deal to have cross endorsements of existing Republican city council seats so we don't have to defend, we can push forward? All those things would have been great for a Republican leader to do when they realize that their campaign is not going well, but unfortunately he's just going to stay in to be a spoiler.
So there's no chance, you're saying no chance that either Sliwa or Cuomo, for that matter, drops out in these final few days?
I don't see a chance. Look, Cuomo's numbers have improved since Adams dropped out, right? That's happened. So Sliwa's numbers have gotten worse. So there's no scenario where Cuomo gets out at this point. The only option would be Sliwa, and like I said, like he's here for the sideshow. He's not here for the main stage. And unfortunately, it's gonna result in most likely Zoran Mamdani being the next mayor.
Joe Borelli is the former Republican leader on the New York City Council, currently a managing director at Chartwell Strategy Group. Follow him on X at Joe Borelli NYC. So, okay, let's assume for the sake of argument, I suppose, that Zoran Mamdani is going to be the next mayor. For what it's worth, Polymarket, the online betting markets, have this as something like a 95% likelihood. So, I mean, it's not a literal foregone conclusion, but I typically trust the follow the money types, and the follow the money types definitely have Zoran Mamdani being the next mayor. So his agenda is radical. We've discussed it on this show. His proposed policies on everything from the municipal grocery stores to all of the massive proposals when it comes to huge public housing, to the taxes and this and that. Across the board, it is a fairly radical slew of proposals. I guess my question to you, and this is very much in your wheelhouse, is talk to us about some of the procedures of this. How much of this can he actually do unilaterally from Gracie Mansion? How much of it actually needs the city council? And frankly, for that matter, how much of it actually would require the state legislature? How much of this is actually a question of state policy as much as he would want to be a question of municipal policy?
Yeah, I mean, the irony is that his biggest ticket items, the ones we focus on the most, are actually the things that he probably can't do. All of it requires a tax increase, something that he almost certainly cannot do on his own. He can raise some tax rates, he can raise some fees, but not in the level that he would need to fund, $9 billion of new spending to go along with like the $17 billion over 3 years that were already in the hole. The city is actually not in great economic sense. This sort of comes after Bill de Blasio ballooning the city government, Adams making some reasonable changes, not many, but the city's not in great financial shape. So it's going to require a real tax hike. That has to come through Albany. So it's not just the governor, who I think the governor will actually concede to this. So the governor, like many Democrats, she is concerned about her primary challenge. Right now, she's facing a primary challenge from her own lieutenant governor, the lieutenant governor that she appointed. I mean, just to give you an idea of the political acumen of Kathy Hochul, the person she appointed is now running against her. But she is afraid of that. She is genuinely afraid of that, and she should be. She was also very fearful that Richie Torres might enter the race, who would be a very formidable candidate for her. He is someone who is a bona fide progressive Democrat, but also has sort of engaged with some people on the moderate right. He's engaged the Jewish community, for example, and he has a lot of fans. He's just a nice guy, too, also. He genuinely is. But she's afraid. So she might concede to the year one tax increases that Zoran Mamdani is pushing because she's up for re-election the next year. So it's going to be interesting to see that. He also needs the approval of the state legislature, which is not as easy as it sounds. The state legislature is radical. It's the New York State Assembly, New York State Senate. But even they are somewhat averse to hiking taxes. They're always worried about their suburban members. They're always worried about maintaining their supermajority. So even if it looks like they might risk a couple of votes, a couple of seats, they might not want to do that much of a hike.
So, Joe, I guess one of the obvious questions that many people, especially folks like me who have lived in the New York area, find themselves asking now is, how the heck did this happen? I mean, like, literally, how the heck did this happen where we are on the precipice of electing a 33-year-old, starry-eyed, completely inexperienced, literally a Karl Marx quote. I mean, he actually quotes the Communist Manifesto on his social media feed. I think the viewers of this show are probably very familiar with his constant refusals to distance himself from Hamas and various other foreign terrorist organizations. I mean, like, literally, how did this happen? I've seen some mixed polling data on this. I've seen some pollsters that purport to show that a lot of his support is coming from non-Native Americans, that's to say immigrants, that actually look at native New Yorkers, that more of them go for Cuomo than Mamdani. And then I've seen some pollsters that actually push back on that and say it's actually not the case there, that a lot of, it's actually a lot of native New Yorkers have really turned radically left there. Obviously, I'm talking in very broad stripes. You're not a Democratic Party strategist. On the contrary, you're a former Republican leader. But talk to us just as a New Yorker, just like how this literally happened.
Yeah, I don't actually buy those demographics, by the way, because I think some of Zohran Mamdani's biggest champions and strongest demographic is the Upper West Side cat lady,
Right.
the older white liberal person. Those are his ride or die people. I mean, the criticism that he is, team gentrifier is pretty accurate. I mean, he represents the part of Brooklyn. His coalition represents the parts of Brooklyn that are sort of, becoming the posh gentrified neighborhoods that you see in rom-coms and things like that. They aren't the networks, the neighborhoods populated by people from the West Indies, people from Asia, for example. Those people, a lot of them are very fearful of this brand of socialism. A lot of them are registered Democrats, no question, but they are very fearful of this brand of socialism. How did it happen, though? To go back to the main question, it all fundamentally starts with the city's primary vote process. We are one of the few, if large cities, that still has closed primaries for municipal offices. Almost every city in America, except for Philadelphia and Charlotte, pretty much have open nonpartisan primaries for elected office. That sort of moderates the Democratic Party, which for the most part is popular in major cities, but it sort of moderates those votes by requiring people to appeal to a broad swath, a lot of people who are concerned about the potholes and the school safety and the regular issues. In New York, that gets thrown out the window because the deciding election for many city council races and the mayor's races and other citywide races is the Democratic Party. The DSA, for all their flaws, right? We have to give these people credit. They are extremely effective at motivating a minority of New Yorkers to get out in the polls, to stick to their talking points, and then they actually demand accountability from their elected officials whom they support. In pure political science terms, they are a study to be emulated, right? Certainly not the policies, but the way they operate is really a study to how parties really should build and grow.
We're chatting again, folks, with Joe Borelli, former Republican leader on the New York City Council, currently a managing director at Chartwell Strategy Group. Follow him on X at Joe Borelli NYC. Joe, one of the points that I made in my column out this morning, which you can find at Newsweek, Los Angeles Times, Real Clear Politics, and elsewhere, is I'm talking about the national ramifications of this. And that really ultimately is the reason that I and many others who don't currently live in New York have been following this story. I reject the framing of this story as just a local story, as a local New York City story. I think it's actually a really, really big deal that someone with this particular political posture, with this particular set of beliefs, is on the precipice of taking over the Western Hemisphere, if not the world's financial and economic center. I mean, the home of the high fashion industry, Broadway, the culture, the arts, the this, the that. I mean, it's still kind of the old notion, Frank Sinatra, Joe. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. But is that really going to be the case? I mean, talk to us a little bit about that. Is what this means for their particular party and for leftism, really kind of extrapolating. If Mamdani actually wins there, what does that mean for the party's brand overall?
I mean, look, I think a lot of New York news is always national news, but more so in this case because the leaders of the Democratic Party institutionally, Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer, are New York City residents. They represent the city, and their endorsement carries weight nationally. And we've already kind of seen this in New York, sort of the inside baseball in New York. And New Jersey, is that Zohran Mamdani has been the boogeyman in some of these races. There's a Nassau County executive race. Bruce Blakeman is a Trump-aligned Republican, great county executive in one of the largest counties in the United States of America. You know, Mamdani has emerged in that race as a fulcrum point. Same thing with the town of Hempstead, which is the largest township in America, 800,000 people. Also in Nassau County, Mamdani has appeared in those ads. Mamdani has appeared and is referenced in the New Jersey governor's race. So we're seeing how Mamdani will play into races nationally, live and in real time. And this is the problem for Hochul, is that, you know, Mamdani's going to win the city, but he's going to lose proverbially the suburbs, right? This is a big challenge for her going forward. What it means nationally, I think, is that more Democrats will, you know, push back towards their hard left base. I think we saw that for the most part in Trump 1.0, when in the midterm year they took a little bit of a beating, and they took a little bit of a beating by going back to the left, not really going to the middle. So they'll try to emulate that. But, I mean, this shutdown, you can see a nexus between this shutdown and Zohran Mamdani. I mean, Chuck Schumer is so fearful of AOC because of the resurgence of the DSA, especially in the parts of his district where he gets the most Democratic votes from, that he is fearful of what this means. And now he's got to show the world that he's big, tough Chuck Schumer. He can shut down the government. The longer this goes, the better for us. That is just, you know, a sign to the radical progressives that elect him, that he's willing to fight for progressive values, something that he's probably not that willing to do in real life.
No, it's an open question, I think, as to what does it even mean to be a moderate Democrat in the year 2025. I mean, is there such thing? I guess there are literally one-off exceptions. I mean, John Fetterman comes to mind. I mean, there are some individuals who, at least on certain issues, seem slightly more reasonable. But, you know, it seemed to me that after the 2024 election, after Kamala Harris lost all 7 swing states to President Trump, it seemed to me like that was a potential time to gravitate towards the center. And there were some faint inklings that maybe they were considering that, but, you know, whether it's Jasmine Crockett down in Texas speaking up or the likely imminent arrival of Zohran Mamdani, it seems to me like they're kind of just doubling down on crazy, and I guess we will see where it goes. But thinking about it again, just from a New Yorker perspective, what do you expect to actually happen? So again, let's just assume for the sake of argument that he actually wins, and we talked a little bit about how a lot of his transformative ideas might not actually make it because of the state legislature and Governor Hochul and so forth there. But let's kind of just play this out. If Mamdani wins a year or two into his mayoral administration, what will that look like when it comes to the city? Are you expecting capital flight, businesses to leave, an exodus of people, of human beings? What do you see happening?
I think the big variable is who he keeps around in terms of how he staffs people, right? I mean, New York's a large city, so who becomes the commissioner of the police department, who becomes the first deputy mayor. These are all real policy decisions that have downstream changes. I think we should give him a couple of seconds to see how he gets his footing, whether he staffs it with genuine people who might be progressive but are serious governing types, or whether he staffs it with young radical ideologues who really have never managed anything more than their own Twitter account. That's going to be the sign for me whether he's going to be a serious mayor or not. The problem is that he can't do a lot of the things he wants to do, but the city council can now fully enact a lot of the most radical and progressive agenda they had. Like him or hate him, Eric Adams was a check on the city council. He vetoed or threatened to veto a lot of city council ideas that would have gone too far in his estimation and the estimation of a lot of New Yorkers. I think you're going to see Mamdani with his foot on the gas pedal. He's certainly not going to veto any progressive item, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what crazy climate ideas, criminal justice ideas, educational ideas that the city council comes up with that Mamdani just rubber stamps.
So the criminal justice angle is actually where I wanted to go next. I mean, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I grew up in an old-school, we back the blue kind of household. We loved police. We were very pro-police, very pro-law enforcement, which is very much my stance.
We call them the good guys, like in my
right.
house and your house probably as well.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, team, civilization, team sanity, team anti-anarchy, whatever you want to call it. But, the left has just gone so crazy, Joe, on this particular issue. They have gone so crazy on the question of basic crime and basic competence. Obviously, I think the summer of 2020, the Black Lives Matter Antifa summer really underscored this nationally for many people to see. So when I hear things from Mamdani, like trying to siphon off funds from the NYPD to this new Department of Community Safety or whatever it is he's calling it there. Do you worry from a tangible NYPD perspective? And what do you think they're thinking actually among the NYPD brass? I'm sure you have many friends and colleagues and contacts there.
Look, there is such a good case to be made for the lack of social service follow-up after 911 calls, after police intervention, for people that are going through crises that are not necessarily crimes, right? Having a mental health crisis, having a mental health episode, being homeless, these things in and of themselves are not crimes. And we can point out the flaw of there not being follow-up with social services. Mamdani he'd be a hero to so many people, and he'd be genuinely implementing good policy if he starts on that side. What he's saying to do is change, because in his mind, the NYPD is fatally flawed when they respond to a mental health crisis, that their first gut reaction is to pull out a gun and shoot or to taser. It's just not true. And my fear is that they will change the rubric of when NYPD responds to situations, maybe domestic violence, maybe mental health, incidents, where there does need to be first, right? We call police first responders. Right? Why? Because they have the tools to handle any situation that arises. When you're dealing with an emotionally disturbed person, you don't know that situation until you're there. We have to keep the scenario where the NYPD is first to arrive, and then, I don't care I don't care how we have to transition, and we can do a better job. But I think having a person to protect the public, to protect family members, spouses, to protect the person themselves, right? All those require police intervention. That's what I'm actually most afraid of. I'm afraid of social workers responding to people having episodes with knives and guns or whatever, and somehow these situations escalate, and now city workers are getting unnecessarily harmed and killed.
So perhaps one final question for you, and that's really troubling stuff, to be clear, exactly what you said there. And I look, as someone who is instinctually just as pro-law and order as it gets, I genuinely hope and pray that this does not get as dark as I've seen some people on social media speculate. I don't think it will, for whatever it's worth. But perhaps one final question for you before I let you go. So, Joe, just kind of thinking about the cyclical history of New York City over the past, let's call it half century. You kind of had some of the dog days in the 1970s, when Times Square was filled with needles and prostitutes. This is before my lifetime. I was born in 1989, but I've heard about this from my parents who are New York natives and plenty of others as well. And you can kind of draw a more or less direct beeline from that to the broken windows policing and the general kind of urban renewal of Rudy Giuliani in the 1990s, leading to the moderate, controversial times, but still quite moderate and certainly pro-policing Bloomberg administration, and then de Blasio. So it's been a bit of a seesaw. It's kind of the point I'm making here. It's been a bit of a seesaw. And the question I have is, if Mamdani gets in there and is able to accomplish, let's call it half or even like a third of what he intends to accomplish, if the city council is really that supine, if Kathy Hochul and the legislature in Albany are really going to bend over backwards for him, if he gets close to half and still enacts a lot of this agenda there, are Republicans going to benefit from that in the mid to long term at both a local level and potentially could that even shift some sentiments at the national level? Actually,
it will. I mean, look, New York news is national news. The problem is that it's still a net negative for this city, right? You're right. There's always been a pendulum. There's always been a seesaw effect. We even saw that going in the right direction when you had Eric Adams sort of end the migrant crisis, try to put more police in more aggressive positions. You had Kathy Hochul putting the National Guard on the subway system, which was a highlight of her administration, something that now, of course, President Trump is evil for doing the same thing. But the reaction will be that Mamdani will seek to moderate NYPD influence. And I think at some point over the next 18 months to 2 years, you'll see morale shift in the NYPD. And, I always paraphrase it as this. If the police know that nothing's going to happen to the perpetrator, right, are they still going to run after someone snatching a baby? 100%. Are they going to run after a person who snatched a pocketbook that's not going to get punished? Probably not.
Joe Borelli, one final time, folks. Joe is the former Republican leader on the New York City Council, currently a managing director at Chartwell Strategy Group. Follow him on X at Joe Borelli NYC. Joe, wishing you nothing but the best from the state of Florida. May you survive the Mamdani apocalypse, and thank you as always for joining us, my friend.
Thank you.
Well, it's time for Hammer Time, our week-ending rundown of the woke stories of the week that were. A top medical school has moved its DEI office to a secret location as it tries to evade accountability. This is happening out at Washington University School of Medicine. This is happening out in St. Louis. They're being accused of literally physically trying to hide their DEI efforts by physically moving the DEI office to a restricted floor of the building. Notably, they have been found by America First Legal. America First Legal is the wonderful legal organization that was founded by Stephen Miller, currently working in the White House, and I believe it's currently being run by a wonderful lawyer by the name of Gene Hamilton. So America First Legal, in this tweet that came out just a few days ago, has this photo saying that WashU St. Louis Medicine didn't dismantle their DEI regime. They literally hid it on a restricted floor, and now, of course, they're suing. Look, the point is this, folks. DEI, which essentially says that white people, Christians, Mormons, Jews, Asians, various groups are inherently problematic simply because they are part of certain groups. And if you are on the opposite end of the woke, oppressor matrix, then you are necessarily a good person. This is inherently racist. It is inherently racist. It's not going to fly under the landmark Donald Trump executive order from back in January of 2025, saying that this stuff is all unconstitutional under the Students for Fair Admissions versus Harvard College Affirmative Action case. It is all illegal under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act there. So essentially, WashU St. Louis, you can run, you can even literally hide your office, but you can't in fact hide. They are going to get you, and kudos to Gene Hamilton and the good folks over at America First Legal, because they are actually quite literally in the process of going to get them. I very much love this story. Well, speaking of DEI, the battle over DEI is messier than ever. This thanks to Robbie Starbuck. Robbie Starbuck's one that we've mentioned on our show in the past. Robbie is a Tennessee-based activist, and he has just been killing it. Robbie Starbuck has been basically taking scalp after scalp, talking about how he's been pressuring companies such as Walmart and McDonald's. We're going to have Robbie on a future episode of the show, by the way, in the not-so-distant future, so stay tuned for that. I'm really excited for that conversation. And Johnny C. Taylor, a man who is the head of the Society for Human Resources Management, they actually invited Robbie Starbuck to their conference. And this man, Johnny Taylor, said that the backlash, the anti-DEI backlash currently across corporate America that's being pushed due to good people like yourself, due to good activists like Robbie Starbuck and Chris Rufo, Taylor said that this backlash reinforces the need for human resource managers to hear from people. So the point is this. The point is that someone like Robbie Starbuck is actually getting invited to these, highfalutin corporate conferences when it comes to human resources, whatever they are. So that's good. I mean, that is a step in the right direction. It's a very positive step that they're inviting folks like Robbie Starbuck, dare I say, like a Chris Rufo, to these conferences there. And DEI, one way or the other, folks, again, is going to be abolished in America for the very simple reason that I was just saying that DEI is illegal, it is unconstitutional, frankly, it is un-American. And it is un-American because it is not part of the American vision for life. It is necessarily antithetical to the founding axioms and principles of the Declaration of Independence. It is necessarily antithetical to the Equal Protection Clause embedded in the 14th Amendment of 1868, the Civil Rights Act, the general ethos of the American Republic of striving towards an ever greater union, of ever greater and fuller and more robust equal protection under law, all ultimately undergirded by Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, this notion that man is made in the divine image. DEI is foundationally contrary to Genesis 1:27, therefore it is foundationally contrary to the United States of America and all that we represent. Finally, 1 in 3 people still say that corporate DEI stances are actually making them more likely to purchase. So the number of Americans is rising who will make a purchase because of corporate DEI policies. So 1 in 3 say that corporate DEI stances make them more likely to purchase. This number has increased in recent polling, actually. If you look year over year, there are now more people who say that it makes them either much more likely or somewhat more likely. So I interpret this as just part of the anti-Trump backlash. Whenever you have someone in power, whenever you have someone who's going to sign things along, whenever he's going to preside over things, you're necessarily also going to have something of a seesaw effect, a corollary where you will have part of your political opposition, part of your ideological opposition that's going to be emboldened as well there. Again, ultimately, I don't think much of this is going to matter because it all ends up being not just un-American, but actually illegal, and these people are ultimately launching a rearguard operation when it comes to doubling down on DEI, and they're ultimately going to get their clocks cleaned and their butts kicked in American courts of law, and certainly based on the broader term trajectory in the marketplace of ideas and the town square as well. So we hope you enjoyed this episode of The Josh Hammer Show. Make sure to like and subscribe if you have not already done so. Have a great weekend, everyone.